New York City, the Plaza Hotel on Fifth Avenue. A December evening that would shake Manhattan's elite society to its core. Michael Brooks, 28, single father and waiter for 3 months, had just accidentally spilled a $1,500 bottle of Chateau Margaux on Senator Victoria Vanderbilt during the most exclusive charity gala of the year. "You're fired!" the manager screamed in front of 200 guests from America's upper crust. As Michael collected the tray with trembling hands, the pendant he wore around his neck slipped out from his shirt. A simple silver eagle, with a ruby embedded in its heart. Katherine Sterling, 48, owner of a $6 billion tech empire, went pale seeing it. She stood up so abruptly, she knocked over the table. "Where did you get that pendant?" Her voice shook. "It was my mother's," Michael replied, confused. Katherine fell to her knees before everyone. "Daniel, is that you? My son? You're alive." That pendant was one of a kind. She'd had it custom-made for her son, kidnapped 24 years ago and presumed dead. The Plaza Hotel gleamed like a jewel on Fifth Avenue that December evening. The annual Vanderbilt Foundation Gala for Children's Health Care had gathered the cream of American society. Tech billionaires, senators, ambassadors, even cabinet members. Michael Brooks moved between the tables with the nervous grace of someone who knew he didn't belong in this world but had to fake it to survive. 3 months earlier, he'd arrived in New York from a small town in West Virginia with a degree in American literature that hadn't opened any doors and student loans that were crushing him. The job at the Plaza paid just enough for a studio apartment in Queens and monthly loan payments, plus daycare for his 4-year-old daughter, Emma. Nothing more, nothing less. That night, fate had decided to play its hand. Senator Victoria Vanderbilt, 70 years of aristocratic arrogance condensed into 110 pounds of Botox and diamonds, made a sudden gesture just as Michael leaned in to pour the wine. The tray wobbled. The bottle slipped. The 1982 Chateau Margaux, pride of the hotel's cellar, spilled like blood onto the senator's white Oscar de la Renta gown worth $60,000. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward the scene. The senator stood, her face a mask of barely contained rage, the ruined dress dripping red wine onto the Italian marble. The hotel manager, Richard Hammond, a small man who compensated for his height with gratuitous cruelty toward staff, materialized like a demon. The words he pronounced echoed through the ballroom like a death sentence. Immediate termination. No references, no severance. Michael felt the world crumbling as he bent to pick up the shattered crystal. It was in that movement that the pendant, always hidden under his shirt per company policy, slipped out. It was a unique piece, a silver eagle in flight, intricately detailed with platinum inlays forming stars on its wings, and at its heart, where the chest would be, a Burmese ruby cut in a heart shape that seemed to contain liquid fire. In the light of the crystal chandeliers, the ruby exploded in a constellation of red reflections. Katherine Sterling was discussing a merger with the Treasury Secretary when her gaze fell on that pendant. The champagne flute slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. The California tan typical of Silicon Valley executives turned ashen. Her legs, which had supported her through billion-dollar negotiations without ever trembling, gave way. She rose with such violence that the table overturned. Waterford crystal, Wedgwood china, $1,000 floral arrangements, everything crashed to the floor in an apocalyptic clatter. But Katherine saw nothing except that pendant. The same pendant she'd commissioned from Tiffany & Co. 24 years ago for her son Daniel's 4th birthday. One of a kind, never replicated, with that ruby she'd personally acquired in Myanmar during a business trip. The ballroom, already silent from the wine incident, fell into absolute shock when Katherine Sterling, the woman who bowed to no one, dropped to her knees before the waiter. Her hands trembled as she pointed to the pendant. Her voice, always firm and commanding, was now broken like a child's. Michael backed away, terrified. This woman, whom he recognized from Fortune magazine covers, was staring at him as if seeing a ghost. When she said the name Daniel, when she said, "my son," when she spoke of a kidnapping 24 years ago, the world began spinning too fast. The pendant, the only thing he had from his mother. Sarah Brooks, the woman who'd raised him in that West Virginia mining town, dead from a heart attack 2 years ago. The woman who'd always told him he was adopted as a baby, found on the steps of the local church on a January night, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, with only that pendant around his neck. The Plaza's penthouse suite had been transformed into an impromptu courtroom. Katherine had essentially commandeered the entire top floor, dismissing everyone except Michael, her attorney James Morrison, and Detective Maria Rodriguez from the NYPD's Missing Persons Unit, her personal friend for 20 years. Michael sat on the burgundy velvet sofa, hands wrapped around a coffee mug he couldn't drink from due to the shaking. Across from him, Katherine frantically flipped through a photo album she'd had brought from her Tribeca penthouse. Photos of a blond boy with green eyes laughing on a swing. The same child in the arms of a beautiful woman with elegant features. The boy blowing out 4 candles on a cake, wearing that exact same pendant around his neck. The DNA test had been ordered urgently at Manhattan's most reliable private lab. But Katherine didn't need scientific confirmation. Beyond the pendant, there were details only a mother could recognize. The dimple on his left cheek when he smiled, the way he tilted his head when confused, even a small crescent-shaped birthmark behind his right ear, identical to his father Robert's. Robert, Katherine's husband, who died in a plane crash 3 years after Daniel's kidnapping. He'd never stopped searching, hoping, until that private jet went down over the Rockies. The NTSB report blamed mechanical failure, but Katherine knew the truth. He'd been flying recklessly, self-destructing from grief. Detective Rodriguez had reopened the case file, archived 15 years earlier, when Daniel had been declared legally dead. The kidnapping had occurred on January 15, 2000. Little Daniel, just turned 4, had been picked up from Manhattan's most exclusive private preschool by a woman who'd presented herself as the new nanny, with seemingly legitimate documents. When Katherine and Robert came to collect him, he'd already vanished without a trace. The search had been massive. Katherine had spent millions, hired private investigators worldwide, made television appeals, offered astronomical rewards. Nothing. Daniel Sterling had disappeared as if he'd never existed. After 7 years, the courts declared him dead. Katherine had continued searching for another 3 years, until Robert's death. Then she, too, had given up, burying the pain under mountains of work and acquisitions. But now her son was here, alive, sitting before her with another name and another story. Michael recounted his childhood in West Virginia with an increasingly uncertain voice. Sarah Brooks, the woman he called Mom, had raised him with love, but in poverty. She was a seamstress in town, earning barely enough to survive. She'd never married, said Michael's father had died in a mining accident before he was born. There were inconsistencies in the story that now, in light of the truth, became obvious. Sarah had no photos of Michael as a baby, claimed they'd been lost in a flood. There were no adoption documents. She maintained they'd been done informally by the old pastor, now deceased. And then there was that pendant, too precious for a small-town seamstress, which Sarah had made him promise never to show anyone. Katherine listened with a mix of joy and rage. Joy at finding her son. Rage for the 24 years stolen. For Robert dead without knowing Daniel was alive. For all the firsts missed. First day of school. Little League games. High school graduation. College. Detective Rodriguez began asking more specific questions about Sarah Brooks. Michael described a sweet but always melancholic woman who sometimes looked at him crying for no reason. A woman afraid of strangers, who never traveled, who always seemed to look over her shoulder. A woman who, on her deathbed, delirious from painkillers, had asked forgiveness from someone named Katherine, a name Michael had never heard before. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Sarah Brooks' true identity emerged. Her real name was Sarah Mitchell, former nanny for New York's high society families in the 90s. But most importantly, she'd been the best friend of Jennifer Walsh, the woman who'd kidnapped Daniel Sterling 24 years ago. Jennifer Walsh had committed suicide in prison 6 months after the kidnapping, before revealing where she'd hidden the child. She'd been the Sterling family's housekeeper for 5 years, earning the family's absolute trust. No one had ever suspected that behind the facade of the faithful employee hid a sick obsession with Robert Sterling and a deep hatred for Katherine, the woman who'd married the man she secretly loved. Sarah Mitchell's bank records, recovered after days of investigation, revealed anonymous monthly deposits for 24 years, always the same amount, $3,000. Enough to live decently in a West Virginia town, not enough to raise suspicions. The money came from Cayman Islands offshore accounts, impossible to trace completely. But investigators found a connection to Thomas Walsh, Jennifer's brother, and prominent Wall Street lawyer. Thomas Walsh was arrested at his Hamptons estate. Under interrogation, he completely broke down. He confessed that his sister Jennifer, before killing herself, had revealed where she'd hidden the child. She'd entrusted him to Sarah Mitchell with precise instructions: raise him far from New York, with a false identity, but treat him well. Jennifer wanted Katherine to suffer the loss, not for the child to suffer. Thomas had kept the secret and paid Sarah for 24 years, partly out of loyalty to his dead sister's memory, partly out of fear of legal consequences. He'd rationalized that the damage was done, that revealing the truth would only bring more pain. But mostly, he'd continued out of cowardice, unable to face the consequences of his sister's actions. Michael listened to these revelations in deep shock. The woman he'd called mom for 28 years wasn't his mother. She was an accomplice to kidnapping. Yet she truly loved him. Sarah had raised him with genuine affection, sacrificing everything for him. She'd paid for his college by taking out loans she'd never lived to repay. She'd nursed him through every illness, supported him through his teenage girlfriend's pregnancy, helped raise Emma when the girl's mother abandoned them both. Katherine struggled with conflicting emotions. She wanted to hate Sarah Mitchell for stealing 24 years with her son, but couldn't deny she'd raised him well. Michael was an intelligent, educated, kind young man. He had a degree, coached youth baseball, was raising his daughter alone with dedication. Sarah had ensured he had values, even within their limited means. The news of Daniel Sterling's discovery exploded in the media like a bomb. The newspapers went crazy with the story of the waiter who was actually an heir. The Plaza was besieged by reporters. Manager Hammond, the same who'd fired him with such cruelty, now crawled asking forgiveness, terrified of possible legal repercussions. But for Michael, or Daniel, he no longer knew what to call himself. The media circus was the least of his problems. His identity, everything he believed himself to be, had dissolved. He wasn't the son of a small-town seamstress.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
He was the heir to a tech empire. He wasn't Michael Brooks. He was Daniel Sterling. But who was Daniel Sterling really? How could he be someone he didn't remember being? The move to the Tribeca penthouse was surreal. Michael went from a 400-square-foot studio in Queens to a 5,000-square-foot penthouse overlooking the Hudson. Housekeepers, drivers, bodyguards, an army of people at his service, when yesterday he was the one serving. Katherine had transformed the penthouse into a shrine of memory. Daniel's room had remained untouched for 24 years. Toys still on the shelves, little clothes in the closet, even the Lego set he'd been building the day of the kidnapping still on the table. It was macabre and touching at the same time. The integration into New York society was brutal. Katherine organized a reception to officially present her son's return. Manhattan's elite flocked en masse, curious to see the miracle. Michael felt like an animal in a zoo, observed, analyzed, judged. The Upper East Side matrons examined him head to toe, finding fault with his waiter's posture, his West Virginia accent, his calloused hands from years of manual work. There were also the fortune hunters. Suddenly, Michael found himself courted by heiresses from New York's best families. The same ones who at the Plaza had treated him like furniture now sent flowers and invitations. The most persistent was Charlotte Vanderbilt, the senator's daughter, whose dress he'd ruined. The irony was so bitter it hurt. But the most painful conflict was internal. Michael couldn't hate Sarah, the woman who'd kidnapped him. He remembered the nights Sarah had stayed up with him when he was sick, the sacrifices to send him to college, the pride in her eyes when Emma was born, how she'd moved in to help with the baby when he was a terrified 24-year-old single dad. Katherine struggled to understand this ambivalence. To her, Sarah Mitchell was a criminal who'd destroyed her family. She couldn't accept that Michael wanted to visit her grave, that he mourned for her. Arguments between mother and son became frequent, fueled by 24 years of absence and mutual misunderstanding. The breaking point came when Michael discovered Katherine had had Sarah's body exhumed for autopsy, searching for evidence of other crimes. The violation of the woman he still considered his mother infuriated him. He fled the penthouse, taking refuge in his old Queen's studio with Emma. Katherine found them there, Emma asleep on the pull-out couch, Michael sitting on the floor holding the only photo he had of him, Sarah, and baby Emma together. For the first time, mother and son really talked, not as the billionaire and the found heir, but as two people broken by the same trauma in different ways. Katherine spoke of Robert, his brilliance, his laugh, how he'd spiraled after the kidnapping. She talked about nights spent searching for Daniel, false leads, the desperation that consumed her. She confessed that after Robert's death, she'd built Sterling Tech into a multi-billion empire to fill the void. But it was never enough. Michael talked about Sarah, her sweetness tinged with sadness, the bedtime stories she'd told, always about lost princes who found their real parents. He understood now they were veiled confessions, disguised requests for forgiveness. He talked about raising Emma alone, how Sarah had been there every step, teaching him to be the father he'd become. That night, mother and son found common ground in shared pain. They decided to try building a relationship not on the lost past, but on the possible present. Katherine promised to respect Michael's grief for Sarah. Michael promised to try knowing the mother he didn't remember. And Emma, waking up to find a grandmother she'd never known existed, simply asked if she could have chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast. 2 months after the reunion, as Michael slowly began adapting to his new life, while maintaining his apartment in Queens for Emma's stability, an even more shocking truth emerged. Thomas Walsh's lawyer, attempting to lighten his client's sentence, delivered documents to the prosecutor that Jennifer Walsh had left before dying. Among these was a sealed letter addressed to Daniel, to be opened on his 25th birthday. Michael had passed that 3 years ago. The judge, after examining it, decided it could be delivered to the recipient. The letter was a river of alternating madness and lucidity. Jennifer confessed her obsessive love for Robert Sterling, begun when she was hired as housekeeper. She described how she'd fantasized for years about taking Katherine's place, becoming Mrs. Sterling. But there was more, something that froze everyone's blood. Jennifer revealed that Katherine wasn't as innocent as everyone believed. She'd discovered that the perfect tech mogul wife was planning a hostile takeover of Robert's company with her business partner, Marcus Chen. The evidence was in emails she'd hacked, in documents she'd photographed secretly. Katherine planned to divorce, take Daniel, and merge both companies under her sole control, leaving Robert with nothing. The kidnapping, in Jennifer's sick mind, had been an act of love toward Robert. She wanted to save him from the humiliation of the corporate betrayal, from the scandal. By taking Daniel, she'd thought to give Katherine what she deserved, the pain of loss, and simultaneously bind Robert to her through shared grief. But the plan had spiraled out of control. Katherine, instead of proceeding with the takeover as Jennifer had expected, had reconciled with Robert. Their marriage, paradoxically, had strengthened in shared pain. Jennifer, seeing her plan fail, had tried to return Daniel, but it was too late. The kidnapping was all over the news. She'd end up in prison, so she'd entrusted the child to Sarah and taken her own life, taking the secret to the grave. Katherine collapsed reading that letter. But then she stood, shaking her head. "It's not true," she said firmly. "Marcus and I were planning a merger, yes, but to strengthen both companies. Robert knew everything. We were going to announce it the week after Daniel was taken. The divorce papers Jennifer claimed to have seen were fake documents we'd created to test if we had a corporate spy. We suspected someone was leaking information to competitors." The truth was even more tragic. Jennifer had destroyed a family based on a misunderstanding, a test that had tragically identified her as the spy they were looking for. Marcus Chen, now retired in Singapore, confirmed everything via video call. The merger had been Robert's idea, a way to secure Daniel's future inheritance. For Michael, it was devastating yet liberating. The family Jennifer had destroyed hadn't been broken from within. The kidnapping hadn't saved a marriage. It had shattered a strong one. The lie had layered upon lie, creating a tragedy from a security test gone wrong. 1 year after that fateful night at the Plaza, Michael Daniel Sterling Brooks, he'd chosen to keep both names, stood before 3 graves in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. Robert Sterling, the father he didn't remember. Sarah Mitchell, the mother who'd raised him. Jennifer Walsh, the woman who'd destroyed and inadvertently created his life. Katherine stood beside him, Emma between them holding both their hands. They'd spent months in family therapy, digging through layers of pain, anger, guilt. They'd learned to know each other not as the mother and son they should have been, but as the people they'd become. Michael had taken control of a division of Sterling Tech, focusing on creating affordable technology education centers in underserved communities. He used his experience of poverty to understand what kids who had nothing really needed. The first center was in his old West Virginia mining town, named after Sarah, not Mitchell, but Brooks, the name she'd chosen for their life together. Emma had blossomed with a grandmother's love, and Katherine had found in her granddaughter the second chance she'd thought lost forever. The little girl, with her grandfather Robert's eyes and her father's determination, bridged 24 years of absence with the simple acceptance only children possess. The pendant that had triggered everything now had new meaning. It was no longer just the link to a stolen past, but the symbol of how truth, however painful, always emerges. Michael had commissioned an exact replica, which he'd placed on Sarah's grave, a gesture of forgiveness for the woman who'd loved him in a lie. The Plaza had offered Michael a multi-million-dollar settlement for wrongful termination, which he'd refused. Instead, he'd asked that they hire 10 single parents from Queens, with full benefits and paid training. Manager Hammond had been fired, replaced by a woman who'd started as a server 30 years earlier. Senator Vanderbilt, she of the wine-stained dress, had attempted to ingratiate herself with the new Daniel Sterling, with invitations and gifts. Michael had received her once, personally serving tea, deliberately spilling a few drops on the antique table. "Accidents happen," he'd said with a smile. The message was clear. Thomas Walsh had been sentenced to 15 years for kidnapping and concealment. From prison, he'd written an apology letter that Michael had read, surprisingly. It spoke of a brother's misguided love, of choosing family over justice, of a secret that had eaten him alive. Michael wrote back once, "I understand choosing family. I forgive you. Don't contact us again." The most touching moment came when Michael found, among Sarah's things, a journal. Pages and pages of remorse, guilty love, justifications, but also genuine pride for every one of Michael's achievements. Fear that the truth would come out. Relief when the heart attack had given her an exit that wasn't confession. And throughout, notes about Emma. She has Katherine's eyes. God forgive me. She has her real grandmother's eyes. The final entry, written the day before she died, was simply, "Forgive me, my boy. I loved you more than I had any right to. When you know the truth, remember only this. To me, you were a true son, the only pure thing in a life of lies. Take care of Emma. She deserves the truth I could never give you." Katherine and Michael decided to create a foundation for missing children, using their story to give hope to other families. The first major fundraising event was held at the Plaza, in the same ballroom where it all began. Michael served wine personally to the guests, wearing the pendant that had revealed his identity proudly. Emma, now 5, handed out programs in a dress Katherine had bought her, but wearing the tiny work boots Michael had gotten her because she wanted to be like Daddy when he was a waiter. The sight of the little girl in designer dress and work boots perfectly captured their merged worlds. In his speech, Michael talked about identities broken and rebuilt, biological mothers and mothers of the heart, fathers lost and found. He talked about how destiny sometimes uses twisted paths to bring us home, even when home is a place we didn't remember leaving. "I was Michael for 28 years, and Daniel for 1, he told the moved audience. "But really, I'm both. I'm the son of a small-town seamstress and the heir to an empire. I'm the product of a crime and an act of distorted love. Most importantly, I'm a father who learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when life spills wine all over your world." That night, as 3 generations went home together, Michael took off the pendant and placed it in a crystal case. He didn't need to wear it anymore. His identity was no longer tied to an object, but to the choices he made every day. He chose to forgive without forgetting. He chose to love despite the pain. He chose to be a bridge between 2 worlds that should never have met, but now could never be separated. And somehow, in that choice, he finally found peace. He was no longer the fired waiter or the found heir. He was simply Michael Daniel, a man who'd learned that identity isn't something you're given at birth or stolen through deceit. It's something you build day by day with your choices and actions. And most importantly, it's something you pass on to a little girl who'd grow up knowing that love transcends lies, that families can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes it takes a spilled glass of wine to reveal the truth. The pendant in the case gleamed in the moonlight, silent witness to a story that had destroyed and rebuilt lives, but in the end had brought a strange form of justice. Not that of the courts, but of hearts that learn to hold contradictory truths and love anyway. The last scene New York remembers is this: Katherine, Michael, and Emma entering the Plaza for Christmas dinner. Michael in a tuxedo, but wearing his old waiter's watch. Katherine in designer clothes, but carrying Emma's stuffed rabbit. And Emma in a princess dress with her work boots. The head waiter who greets them is one of the single parents from Queens Michael had gotten hired. They exchange a knowing smile. Because now everyone knows that sometimes destiny serves its bitterest dishes on silver platters, but also that from the most bitter cup can come the sweetest wine. And that a pendant, in the end, is just a piece of metal until someone recognizes it and cries, "It's you! You're alive! You've come home!" But the real miracle wasn't the recognition. It was Emma, tugging on her grandmother's hand, saying, "Grandma Cat, Daddy says we're having pizza after this fancy dinner." He promised. And Katherine Sterling, the billionaire who'd once ruled boardrooms with an iron fist, laughing and saying, "Only if I get to pick the toppings." Hit like if you believe truth always finds its way, even after 24 years. Comment with the moment that touched you most. Share with someone who needs to know that identity isn't what you're given, but what you choose to become. Subscribe for more stories that prove destiny uses mysterious ways to bring us home.